The neat round spaghetti you can eat with a spoon.
No fillers, so they're always plump, juicy, and delicious.
Tang has a fresh orange taste, a full day's supply of vitamin C in every glass. And
these lunches filled metal lunchboxes and hungry hearts. And now they vanished without a trace, like they never mattered at all. What did we lose when we stopped feeding our kids the flavors that once defined a generation? It came in a little metal tin with a key you had to crank open like a can of paint, and inside was a pinkish meat paste that somehow became the crown jewel of school lunches across the country. Deviled ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread were the kind of thing your mom would pack with the same confidence as someone handing you a gold bar. It was salty, it was tangy, and it had that uncanny ability to smell up the entire lunchroom in 5 seconds flat. There was no middle ground. You either prayed for a trade or guarded it like it was national treasure. And let us not forget the bread. Wonder Bread, so white and soft it almost melted when you touched it. It was less of a sandwich and more of an edible napkin wrapped around a meat mystery. Kids today could not even imagine something like this being edible, let alone desirable. But back then, it was what you looked forward to after recess. It was what reminded you that even if you forgot your homework, at least your lunch was unforgettable. Somehow, deviled ham became a status symbol for a very specific kind of childhood chaos. Hot dog pie was what happened when dinner and lunch collided in the middle of a very questionable casserole dish. It was part mystery, part meat, and all nostalgia. Imagine cutting into a pie crust expecting apples and finding chopped up hot dogs swimming in a sea of onion, ketchup, and maybe a few rogue vegetables. It should have been horrifying, but to kids in the 1970s, it was a warm hug from a world that did not know what cholesterol was. Moms made it when they had too many leftovers and no energy. Dads ate it like it was steak. And kids? Kids bragged about having it cold in their lunchboxes the next day. It was savory, sloppy, and full of heart. Not culinary heart, just the metaphorical kind. Every forkful was a gamble. Would you hit more meat or more mush? Did it matter? Probably not. All that mattered was that it felt homemade. It felt like someone tried. Even if that someone was making dinner out of the last 5 hot dogs, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a dream. Today, it sounds like a fever dream. Back then, it was a Tuesday. JellO salad with shredded carrots was a betrayal that somehow got passed off as a side dish for decades. It looked like dessert and tasted like confusion. Your fork would go in expecting sweetness and come out with carrot bits clinging to neon green gelatin. No one knows who started it. Some say it came from the church potluck crowd. Others swear it was a prank gone too far. Either way, it ended up on cafeteria trays and family tables alike. You could not escape it. Lime JellO was the most common offender, but there were worse versions: orange, lemon, and the truly cursed cherry with celery. Moms called it a salad, so you would eat it. But there was no lettuce, no dressing, just the jiggling horror of a dessert that desperately wanted to be a vegetable. It was served with pride, too. People molded it into rings, decorated it with pineapple slices, and acted like it was gourmet. You had to pretend to like it. Not out of politeness, but because the grown-ups genuinely thought it was good. It was one of the strangest culinary gaslights of the 20th century. And somehow, it stuck. SpaghettiOs in a thermos were never hot. That was the unspoken truth everyone knew, but no one dared admit. They started hot, sure, bubbling on the stove in that cheerful red can. But by lunchtime, they were lukewarm at best, trapped in a metal container that always smelled slightly like old soup. And yet, those lukewarm pasta rings were magic. A swirling alphabet of childhood comfort, swirling in that iconic orange-red sauce. It was not Italian food, it was not even pasta, really. It was SpaghettiOs, and that was enough. Kids would open their thermos with a dramatic twist, steam barely rising, and proudly take a spoonful like it was gourmet. Because it was not just about taste, it was about ritual, about having something warm in a sea of cold sandwiches, about having a lunch that made you feel like home followed you to school. You knew you would burn your tongue on the first bite and still go in anyway. It was worth it. even when the sauce stained your shirt or your spoon got lost at the bottom of the thermos. You would do it again and again. Olive loaf on rye was your mom's attempt at sophistication, whether you asked for it or not. It looked like Bolognia, until you noticed the green pimento-stuffed olives embedded like some kind of edible mosaic. The meat was pink, the olives were green, and the whole sandwich smelled like a deli had gotten lost in a thrift store. Rye bread made it even fancier, with its dense texture and sharp tang. But kids did not care about fancy. They cared about not getting laughed at, and bringing olive loaf to school was social suicide. Still, it had its defenders. Kids who genuinely liked the odd mix of salty meat and briny olives. Maybe they were ahead of their time. Maybe they just had weird taste buds. Either way, they stood by it. You could find olive loaf in plastic lunchboxes next to Capri Suns and string cheese. It held its own in a world of peanut butter and jelly. It was bold, it was unapologetic, and most of all, it was forgotten. Today, even deli counters hesitate to carry it. But back then, it was a declaration. My mom shops at the nice grocery store. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were what happened when your parents wanted to show off a little. Elvis Presley supposedly ate them by the dozen, which gave them some sort of mythical cool factor. But even without the king's endorsement, they were the kind of lunch that made you feel like royalty. Greasy, sticky royalty. The peanut butter glued everything together, while the bacon gave it that crunch you could hear 2 tables over. Sweet, salty, and absolutely heart-stopping. Literally. This was not diet food. This was your mom was feeling generous food. Served on white bread, maybe toasted if she had time, it was the sandwich version of getting away with something. You were not supposed to eat bacon for lunch. You were definitely not supposed to drown it in peanut butter. And yet, there it was, crammed into a sandwich bag and sweating by noon. By the time lunch rolled around, the bacon was soggy, the peanut butter had oozed out the sides, and it was still somehow perfect. Nobody makes them anymore. Maybe that is for the best. But once upon a time, it was the king of brown bag lunches. Vienna sausages and saltines were not a meal. They were a dare. Tiny pink tubes floating in mystery juice, packed into a can that hissed when you opened it, like it knew it was about to be judged. You would drain them, maybe pat them dry, and line them up like little soldiers on a stack of saltines. No heat, no fuss, just raw, salty commitment. The crackers softened under the weight of the sausages, sometimes crumbling entirely. But you powered through because this was your lunch, and if you were lucky, there was mustard. Not fancy mustard. Yellow squeeze bottle stuff that cut through the meat-flavored monotony. It was not gourmet, it was survival. A lunch built for kids who knew how to eat without complaining. And maybe, just maybe, you started to like it. Maybe the weirdness became comforting. Like knowing you could always count on something so unapologetically odd to be waiting in your lunchbox. Kids today would never touch them. But back then, they were a rite of passage. American chop suey in a Tupperware bowl was the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Pasta, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever else your mom had lying around. It was not pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles were usually elbows, the meat was always overcooked, and the sauce was probably from a jar. Still, it had heart. It had the kind of comfort only a plastic lid could seal in. You would open it at lunch, and the steam would hit your face like a warm blanket that smelled like oregano. Some kids wrinkled their noses, others traded a fruit roll-up for a few bites. It was the kind of lunch that got better the longer it sat. Something about the way the noodles soaked up the sauce made it taste like home. And if it was cold, even better. You could fork it straight from the fridge and feel like a rebel. It was not Chinese, it was not Italian, it was just American. And it worked. Bronvwiger sandwiches were the dark horse of childhood lunches. Wrapped in wax paper and made with a spreadable meat that looked like wet clay, they were both feared and weirdly respected. Bronvwiger, for those who did not know, was liver sausage, soft, salty, and undeniably pungent. It spread like butter and smelled like your grandpa's hat closet. But it had a following, a small, loyal following. Kids who grew up in German households or with parents who loved real food swore by it. Served on rye bread, with mustard or onions if your parents were brave, it was the kind of lunch that made your classmates take a step back. You did not trade this sandwich. You defended it. You ate it with confidence. Or you tried to. The taste was overwhelming, but it stuck with you, literally and figuratively. No one could ever spell it, but everyone remembered it. It was the kind of lunch that made you grow up a little faster. And maybe, just maybe, miss it a little when it was gone. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also known as stuff on a shingle, was a meal built in the trenches that somehow ended up in American cafeterias. It started in the military, a way to stretch dried beef into something resembling sustenance. The beef was salty, thin, and usually shredded beyond recognition. The sauce? A thick white gravy made from flour, milk, and determination. It was poured generously over toast, biscuits, or anything else that could act as a sponge. In school lunches, it arrived in lukewarm plastic trays, never quite hot, never quite cold. Kids either loved it or dreaded it. There was no in-between. It was filling, fast, and had that unmistakable cafeteria smell that followed you into math class. Some parents made it at home, calling it comfort food. Others never touched it again after leaving the service. But for a generation of kids, it was just lunch. A strange, salty, beige experience that somehow stuck around long enough to be missed. Kugel was not just peanut butter. It was an experiment in how far food companies could stretch the idea of flavored spread before people revolted. Banana Kugel, chocolate Kugel, even cinnamon. It came in a jar just like peanut butter, but the label had this psychedelic flair that practically screamed, "I was made in the 1970s." Your sandwich was suddenly a dessert, and not always in a good way. Some kids loved it. Others could not stomach it. But if your mom packed you a Kugel sandwich, you knew one thing for sure. You were not eating anything normal today. It stuck to the roof of your mouth like drywall paste and smelled like a bakery that had lost its identity. Nobody knew what to pair it with, so people got creative. White bread was the usual suspect, maybe with some jelly if you were brave. It was part sugar rush, part lunch, and part science fair gone wrong. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, it vanished. Like a fever dream with a screw-on lid. Now, it is a ghost of school lunches past, one that gets weirder the more you try to remember it. Pickle and cheese roll-ups were the kid version of adult charcuterie, except nobody knew what charcuterie was back then. It was just a dill pickle, wrapped in a slice of processed cheese, maybe stabbed with a toothpick if your mom was feeling fancy. Sometimes ham got involved, sometimes not. Either way, it was salty, slippery, and weirdly satisfying. This was the kind of lunch your mom packed when she was out of bread, but still wanted to say, "I tried." Velveeta was the cheese of choice, because it bent, folded, and clung to the pickle like it had something to prove. You would pull it out at the lunch table and immediately get reactions. Some kids gagged, others begged for a bite. There was no middle ground. It was all crunch and chew and tang, a flavor bomb that somehow felt refreshing and heavy all at once. Keto kids today might think they invented the idea. They did not. We were rolling pickles in cheese before it was cool, and definitely before it was considered healthy. It may have looked like a lazy lunch hack, but back then, it was a declaration of resourcefulness. Tuna noodle casserole leftovers were not made for lunchboxes. They just ended up there. The night before, it was dinner, steaming, bubbly, topped with crushed potato chips or breadcrumbs if your family was fancy. But by lunch the next day, it was cold, compact, and stuffed into a square Tupperware container with a lid that never quite sealed. The smell was unmistakable. One whiff, and everyone in the cafeteria knew what you were working with. Tuna, noodles, cream of mushroom soup, maybe some peas, maybe not. It was never pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles fused together into a kind of casserole cake, and you had to hack at it with your plastic fork just to make progress. But somehow, it still tasted like home. like tired parents and scrape together groceries and we'll eat this for 2 days straight. You might not have been thrilled to see it in your lunchbox, but you respected it. It was dependable. It was solid. And let us be honest, it was better than a soggy Bolognia sandwich. Beeferoni in a thermos was the spaghetti sauce equivalent of a childhood survival kit. It was warm, sometimes tangy, soft, and always recognizable by that strange metal and tomato scent that lingered even after the last bite. Chef Boyardee was the man behind the madness, a culinary icon in a white mustache who turned canned pasta into childhood currency. If you had a thermos full of beeferoni, you were living large. No sandwiches, no mystery meats, just straight-up noodles and meat sauce from a can sealed inside a container that always burned your fingers. But here is the thing. It was delicious. Not gourmet delicious, but comfort food from a post-war grocery shelf delicious. The meat was more of a suggestion. The pasta was mushy, and the sauce stuck to your spoon like syrup. And yet, you wanted more, because it was yours. A warm, weird, familiar little meal that tasted like cartoons and Saturday mornings and the last week before summer break. These days, nobody brings canned pasta to school. But back then, that was luxury. That was lunch. Egg salad with Miracle Whip was a ticking time bomb of flavor, temperature, and social acceptance. It had to be cold, like refrigerator cold. But by the time lunch rolled around, it was usually lukewarm and a little too fragrant for comfort. The eggs were chopped to varying degrees of success, the Miracle Whip was applied with reckless abandon, and the bread was, unfortunately, white and soggy. Still, it had a fan base. Some kids loved that tangy, creamy taste and fought anyone who called it gross. Others would rather starve. What made it controversial was not the eggs. It was the Miracle Whip. That sweet, vinegary punch that made every bite feel like a dare. Mayonnaise loyalists refused to touch it. Miracle Whip defenders said it had zing. It divided families. It divided lunch tables. But it showed up, week after week, in millions of brown bags and plastic lunchboxes, packed with love, packed with risk. Canned corned beef sandwiches were the gritty, salty, greasy cousin of roast beef. It came from a can, opened with one of those little metal keys that always broke halfway through. You would pry the meat out with a spoon, mash it down between 2 slices of bread, and hope the sandwich bag held it together. The texture was somewhere between shredded and gelatinous. The flavor was pure salt and survival, and somehow it just worked. It made you feel like a cowboy, like someone who could build a fort and start a fire with one match. There was no luxury here. No lettuce, no tomato, no side of chips to distract you. Just meat. Canned meat, wrapped in bread and ambition. It was the lunch equivalent of a handshake from your grandpa. Firm, a little rough, and full of stories you never asked for. You might wrinkle your nose at it today, but back then, it was a staple. A symbol of frugality and strength. Something you packed when the fridge was empty, but the pantry still had promise. Mock chicken legs were the original food illusion. They looked like drumsticks, kind of. But one bite told you everything you needed to know. This was not chicken. It was a meat mashup molded around a stick, breaded, and fried into something that passed as poultry from 5 feet away. School cafeterias loved them. They were cheap, easy to prepare, and came in industrial-sized bags that probably said meat product in fine print. But the kids? The kids were split. Some devoured them without question. Others dissected them like scientists trying to uncover the mystery within. Was it turkey? Pork? Some beef-chicken hybrid dreamed up in a lab? Nobody knew. Nobody cared. Because it had breading, it had crunch, and it came with mashed potatoes and gravy that soaked everything in cafeteria beige. You could eat it with your hands and pretend you were at a picnic. Spam and mayonnaise sandwiches were a rite of passage for anyone who grew up in a pantry-first household. You opened the can with that signature key, slid out the wobbly pink brick, and sliced it thin. Not too thin. You wanted some heft. Then came the mayo, slathered on white bread like a culinary Band-Aid. The result? A cold, squishy, salty slab of meat product that somehow felt like home. you did not question it. You ate it. Because Spam was dependable. It lasted forever, required no cooking, and had enough sodium to embalm a small animal. If you were lucky, your mom fried it first. If you were not, you got it straight from the can. Either way, you took it to school and hoped no one noticed. But here is the secret. You liked it. Maybe not always, maybe not out loud, but deep down, you respected it. Spam did not pretend to be ham. It was Spam. And in a world of lies and soggy lettuce, that meant something. Tomato aspic was the JellO that haunted your dreams. Bright red, wobbling, and inexplicably savory, it looked like dessert and tasted like regret. Imagine gelatin made from tomato juice, molded into rings or cubes and filled with chunks of celery, onions, or even shrimp. You would see it at family gatherings or school potlucks, always proudly displayed like a sculpture no one wanted to touch. But someone always did. Someone always took the plunge. Maybe it was your aunt, maybe it was you, and once you had a bite, there was no going back. The texture was wrong, the flavor was confusing, but the memory, that stuck forever. It was supposed to be elegant. It was supposed to be a salad. What it was a warning. A gelatin-based cry for help from an era that tried way too hard to make vegetables exciting. It did not survive the times. And thank goodness. But if you ever ate it, you earned a badge of honor most kids today will never know. Pizza burgers on English muffins were the Frankenstein of school lunch creativity, and we loved them for it. Ground beef, tomato paste, shredded cheese, maybe some oregano if you were lucky, all piled onto half a toasted English muffin and baked until it resembled something pizza adjacent. They were greasy, they were messy, they were perfect. The cheese bubbled, the edges got crispy, and the muffin soaked up every bit of meat juice like a sponge with a purpose. This was not delivery. This was not frozen. This was home-brewed, cafeteria-made, microwave magic pizza for the masses. They usually came in pairs, wrapped in foil and slightly flattened by the weight of a juice box. You could smell them across the room. They were the kind of lunch that made other kids jealous, even if they pretended not to be. And best of all, they were easy to recreate. Some kids went home and made them again for dinner, because they were simple, satisfying, and just the right amount of rebellious. It was not quite pizza, but it was everything we wanted. Apple butter on white bread was the PB&J of hard times. It was sweet, sticky, and had that deep brown color that made it look like something between jam and molasses. But it was neither. Apple butter came from slow-cooked apples and spices, cinnamon, cloves, all that good stuff, but it had no butter in it at all. The name just made it sound fancier than it was. Spread thin on a slice of white bread that squished under your fingers, it became lunch in its simplest form. No peanut butter, no jelly, just a humble smear of brown sweetness and the kind of bread that dissolved the moment it touched your tongue. It was especially popular in rural towns, Amish communities, and Depression-era households where a jar of apple butter could stretch for weeks. Some kids thought it tasted like pie. Others thought it tasted like boredom, but nobody forgot it. It was the kind of lunch that made you feel like life was slower, simpler, and maybe a little more honest. Macaroni salad with mini shrimp was the kind of lunch that either got you praise or exiled to the far end of the cafeteria. It looked innocent enough. Pale noodles, mayonnaise, a hint of dill maybe. But then you saw them. Tiny pink shrimp, curled like question marks, hiding between elbow macaroni like little seafood spies. Cold seafood was already a bold move for lunch, but this was full-on culinary roulette. The salad sat in a plastic container sweating under the cafeteria lights, waiting to be opened like Pandora's box. You would crack the lid and pray no one noticed. But they always did. The smell had range. Still, there was something about it. Maybe the creaminess, maybe the salt, maybe the fact that it felt like a grown-up dish in a kid's world. If your mom packed it, you knew she was trying to give you something nutritious. If you actually liked it, you were probably destined to eat sushi before anyone else your age. It was daring, it was divisive, and it was unforgettable in all the wrong and right ways. The Bologna and potato chip sandwich was culinary rebellion between two slices of white bread. You took something soft, processed, and questionably meaty, Bologna, and smashed it together with a handful of salty, crinkly chips. The result? A masterpiece of texture and audacity. The bread squished, the chips cracked. The Bologna just sort of lay there, like it had given up trying to be taken seriously. But man, did it work. Every bite was a crunch and a squish, salt and fat, school lunch magic. You did not need condiments. You did not even need refrigeration. All you needed was a bag of chips, a few slices of lunch meat, and an iron will. Some kids swore by sour cream and onion. Others were team barbecue. Either way, this sandwich was loud. It crunched with every bite and made every cafeteria whisper turn your way. It was not healthy. It was not proper. But it was yours. A Frankenstein lunch, born out of desperation and absolute genius. And it tasted better than any turkey club could ever hope to. Leftover meatloaf slabs on sandwich bread were the kind of lunch that felt like dinner dressed in yesterday's clothes. Thick, cold, slightly greasy slices, often cut unevenly, slapped between slices of bread that could barely hold the weight. Ketchup was the glue. Sometimes mustard too, if your parents were feeling bold. The sandwich was dense, hearty, heavy in a way that made you chew slowly, not because you wanted to savor it, but because your jaw needed to keep up. But it stuck to your ribs. It filled you in a way peanut butter never could. Some kids would microwave it. Others ate it cold, straight from the lunchbox like little blue-collar champions. It tasted like your family tried to save money, tried to feed everyone, tried to make leftovers into something new. It was yesterday's dinner repackaged into a meal with its own identity. And even if the bread got soggy, even if the ketchup bled through the plastic wrap, it somehow still felt right, like comfort food that refused to quit. Tang and peanut butter crackers were the lunchbox combo that buzzed like a sugar rush and crumbled like a sandcastle. Tang was that electric orange drink powder that promised to be what the astronauts drank, which somehow made it cool even though it tasted like citrus detergent. You scooped it into water, stirred until your arm ached, and still ended up with clumps. Then came the peanut butter crackers. Dry, crumbly, stuffed with just enough peanut butter to glue your mouth shut. Together, they made the kind of lunch you ate fast, then regretted slower. But they got the job done. Tang kept you wired until math class. The crackers kept your stomach from growling during recess. It was not fancy, it was not fresh, but it was fuel. You could find both at gas stations, vending machines, or packed lovingly by moms who had 5 minutes and a tight grocery budget. Cucumber and cream cheese tea sandwiches were your mom's attempt at classing up a lunch that had no business being fancy. Thin slices of cucumber, whipped cream cheese, crustless white bread, cut into dainty triangles like you were expected to sip Earl Grey during recess. You pulled it out of your lunchbox and immediately felt judged. Not because it was bad, it was actually kind of refreshing, but because it was different, delicate. It looked like it belonged on a silver tray at a bridal shower, not a cafeteria table next to chocolate milk and fruit snacks. But if you gave it a chance, it hit just right. The cream cheese was cool and tangy, the cucumber crisp, and the bread a soft cloud holding it all together. You might not have understood why your mom packed it, but by the last bite, you appreciated it. Even if your friends were eating ham and cheese or leftover pizza, you had something unique, something light, something that made you feel like you were in on a secret, a quiet kind of delicious. Canned ravioli and foil-wrapped Tupperware was the pre-microwave generation's desperate attempt at hot lunch. You cracked open a can, dumped those little sauce-covered pillows into plastic, wrapped the whole thing in foil like it was going to a moon landing, and hoped for the best. By lunch, it was lukewarm, maybe still warm if your thermos game was strong. The cheese inside was lava or rubber, no in-between. The sauce stained everything, your spoon, your Tupperware, your memories. But it was worth it. That first bite of soft pasta and canned tomato glory made everything okay. You did not need gourmet. You needed familiar. And Chef Boyardee delivered. Not all ravioli was created equal, of course. Some came with beef, others with cheese. And all of it had that metallic tang that told you it came from a can and was proud of it. You would eat it fast, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and power through the rest of the day like a soldier. It was lunch that asked for nothing and gave just enough. Potted meat spread was the food version of a locked basement door. Mysterious, possibly terrifying, and definitely not for the faint of heart. It came in tiny tins with vague labels and even vaguer ingredients. A meat paste. That is all anyone really knew. You scooped it out, grayish and glistening, and smeared it on crackers or white bread like it was pâté. Except it wasn't. It was survival food with a side of mystery. Salty, rich, shelf-stable for eternity. It was what you ate when ham was a dream and Bolognia was a luxury. Lunchboxes across the country carried it like a secret. Some kids loved it. Most kids refused to go near it. But if you were one of the chosen few, you held your tin with pride. You ate your potted meat sandwich and ignored the side eyes, because it was yours, and it was filling. It may not have had a glamorous origin, but it packed enough punch to keep you full through history class. Fruit cocktail over cottage cheese was what happened when your mom tried to be healthy with what was left in the fridge. A scoop of pale, lumpy cottage cheese topped with fruit cocktail straight from the can, syrup and all. Cherries, pears, grapes, those weirdly firm peach cubes, all swimming together like a sweet little mistake. The textures clashed, the temperatures clashed. And yet, this was considered a lunch. Or worse, a treat. It looked like dessert, but felt like punishment. Still, it had its defenders. People who loved that mix of creamy and sweet, cold and tangy. It was what you packed when yogurt was too expensive and JellO had run its course. It made you feel like you were doing something good for your body, even if your taste buds were begging for mercy. Today it sounds like something from a diet cult, but back then it was a noble effort. Cheese dreams were grilled cheese's louder, bolder cousin, open-faced, toasted, bubbling, a slice of white bread topped with a generous layer of American cheese, sometimes a bit of bacon, then broiled until it looked like lava in a diner. This was Depression-era comfort food turned cafeteria classic. The name sounded fancy, like something from a restaurant, but it was homemade and humble. Your grandma probably made them. Your mom probably tried to improve them, but no matter who made them, cheese dreams were unforgettable. You would bite in and the roof of your mouth would blister from the molten dairy and you would not even care. It was cheesy, salty, a little smoky, and exactly what you needed to make it through the day. They were cheap, easy, and oddly beautiful, like little golden suns staring back at you from a paper plate. Who says you need apples to make an apple pie? Not the Depression era, folks, that's for sure. This mock apple pie was a genius hack that used Ritz crackers as the crust and a sweet, sticky filling made from sugar, cinnamon, and water. It was a budget-friendly dessert that satisfied the sweet tooth without the need for expensive or hard-to-find ingredients. Plus, it was a great way to use up those stale crackers lurking in the back of your pantry. The Ritz mock apple pie became a Depression-era favorite, despite the fact that it was a pastry imposter. How did it work? The aromatic mixture of sugar, cinnamon, butter, lemon juice, and crackers combined to convince the taster's senses that the pie actually tasted of apples. Mock apple pie actually dates to the mid-1800s. During the wintertime, when apples were scarce and dried apple stores were used up, inventive home cooks would instead use soda crackers or stale bread. The more modern Ritz cracker version came about in the 1930s. So you might notice that this issue where you need a lot of prep work for these dishes isn't exactly a unique one. Lots of dishes share it, and even cottage cheese and pineapple bowls have the same problem. Now, this dish was something that came out around the 60s and 70s, when Americans were really into trying out new things. One of the first things they opted for was pineapple, and this was thanks to Spam, which really made the American population warm up to an otherwise chronically detested fruit. This bowl was seen as healthy, full of protein, it was cold, and it could be prepared way ahead of time. The reason this lasted as long as it did was probably because of that. though only people that were super serious about their health and diet would be bringing this kind of stuff to the office. It wouldn't make sense to ignore the perfectly convenient, cheap, and delicious deli food on the corner of your office and go for a cottage cheese and pineapple bowl. Unfortunately, while this one has the convenience factor down, it couldn't last in the long haul because tastes have just changed too much from the days where bowls like this could work. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies, and this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even speedifests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. Blue crab was a really common and affordable food for a lot of coastal communities. It has become a sought-after item in places like Maryland and Louisiana and the Carolinas. But how did it get here? Blue crab was considered an everyday coastal food that was abundant among fish markets and fishermen. You would go take a walk along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, and all you would ever see is a seemingly endless supply of blue crab that would never really go down either. For a lot of working-class families, this was a staple protein that was really helping them get through the day, while also making sure they were meeting their nutrition needs. Now, the labor process here was really hard. It took a lot to make blue crab, and cracking blue crabs to get the different kinds of meat was really time-consuming. It meant that they were less desirable for other consumers who basically would prefer lobster or oysters, especially the rich kind. They were really cheap and they weren't ever given away in fishing towns. People made use of everything they could, mostly because they were so available, you know? While you would think that would mean that people would essentially always sell the excess fish, they would actually just stock up on it for winters and consume it. Blue crab started to become expensive thanks to the rise of commercial fishing and a lot of environmental work that had risen in the Chesapeake Bay. Blue crab populations were starting to decline really sharply, and it became a thing of national concern. That and the high labor cost meant that blue crab was starting to get really pricey. Deli classics have always been Graham's specialty, and the corned beef sandwich was no exception. This one started out as a nod to the traditions of Eastern European cuisine and became popular in the United States in the early 20th century. In case you're wondering about the name, corned beef comes from the curing process. Corned refers to the large grains of salt that are used to preserve the meat. This was a pretty simple beef sandwich with a hint of mustard, but its taste really spoke for itself. And it even made its way into pop culture by being frequently featured in TV shows, movies, etc. For example, in the film The Godfather, there's a memorable scene where a character is shown eating a corned beef sandwich. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you remember it. Vinegar pie is the rather odd dish on this list that proves that at times of desperation, anyone will eat anything. Vinegar pie started spreading infectiously out of states like Pennsylvania in the start of the 1930s and tops even dandelion salad when it comes to being budget-friendly. All you would need is an open crust, vinegar, sugar, and some eggs to create this unique pie. To cover the mediocre taste, people would coat the crust with a meringue. It was an affectionate treat to bring in case of a celebration and was easy to make if you had a sweet craving. The dish was also pretty delicious if you were able to get over the sour vinegar taste and focus on the meringue. People really wanted a sweet treat at the end of a hard week spent cutting corners and working long hours, and small joys like vinegar pies were what kept people sustained. Plowman's lunch was this really traditional British cold meal, and I guess you'll find a lot of these on the list. The basic combo here was basically just bread, some pickles, chutneys, apples, and cheese. You'd also get chutneys, which I'm not sure what that's worth. The British never really made good ones anyway. Hey, I'm only kidding. It's quintessentially a European breakfast though, and over there it's even considered rustic. But over here, just like the previous item, this was considered pretty controversial. Now, most of the setup here was something any pure-blooded American could work with. You have your farmhouse loaves, some sourdough if that's not your type, or even multi-grain bread. We've eaten Subway on hungrier days with those same options, right? It was just the cold meat part that wouldn't vibe well with a lot of people. I mean, really though, what do you expect? This is the land of cookouts with grills, deep-fried chicken fillets, and melted gooey cheese on just about everything. Cold just doesn't fit anywhere in that picture. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a cuisine that we haven't really explored before. I'm talking about Capanada, which is a very traditional Sicilian dish that goes all the way back to the 18th century. It's supposed to be a sailor's dish. Can you believe that? It got that reputation attached to it because the birthplace of Capanada was Sicily. There's no specific restaurant or name that's credited with making it, but if you ever went there, you'd know just how much the people appreciate this. The first time this became popular in America was when Mediterranean cuisine and Italian immigrants were mixing together and creating all sorts of new dishes, as well as bringing old familiar ones from their homeland. The best part about this dish for a lot of people was that it gave a chance to a vegetable, which otherwise people just aren't too fond of. I mean, eggplants aren't really the most main course worthy idea you could think of, right? Pair that up with some tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers and cook it in vinegar, sugar, and olive oil. Make a nice little traditional agrodolce sauce, and you'll get this extremely earthy dish with a lot of complex flavors going for it. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Cold fried chicken wasn't exactly what the name makes it sound like. You can't really cold fry something, obviously, but what you can do is serve fried chicken that's been chilled, or fried chicken that's at least at room temperature. See, this was something that got popular at picnics, and it was a way for people to get rid of leftovers when they didn't have microwaves. As you might know, fried chicken tends to lose a lot of its charm when you just warm it up on a pan and stove. Now, I'm no one to judge, but that's just not how you do it. Naturally, though, if you don't have a microwave, that's where your head would go, and a lot of people just didn't back then. So, what's the next step? Do we bite the bullet and eat that delicious fried chicken cold or at room temperature? Or do we warm it up and lose a lot of the bang for buck value that comes with a 3-piece combo for like $2 or $3? Most people stuck with the first option. Cold fried chicken would also be good as a work lunch because it was an easy way to get rid of your leftovers if you didn't feel like eating it at home, plus it was super quick. Just grab the fried chicken, box it, and go. You had your work lunch for that day sorted. It caught on a lot more than you'd think, really. Remember what chilly days at Graham's called for back in the day? If you guessed hot turkey sandwich, you're absolutely right. This sandwich was another one of Grandma's delicious ways of using up leftover turkey from Thanksgiving. This sandwich featured slices of tender turkey served hot, often open-faced, with a generous ladle of rich, savory gravy poured over the top. Sounds delicious, right? Grandma made her hot turkey sandwich special with the gravy. Whether she made it from scratch with turkey drippings or used a trusted recipe, the rich gravy soaked into the bread, making each bite juicy and flavorful. She knew that nothing went to waste, and the hot turkey sandwich was a delicious way to make the most of those leftovers. Back in the day, when you were out of just about everything except sugar, flour, and fruit, a vinegar cobbler was your only option. No surprise that it was also known as one of the famous desperation pies. Desperation pies are pies in American cuisine made using staple ingredients like butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and any other ingredients that cooks had on hand to complement them or substitute for ingredients that were out of season or too expensive. These pies were more common before refrigeration and canned pie fillings, and during times of hardship like the Great Depression and rationing of World War II. When fresh fruits were hard to come by, people turned to vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruits like apples and lemons. This cobbler used a mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices to create a filling that, when baked, tasted surprisingly similar to a fruit cobbler. Instead of chunks of fresh apples, those on a budget would use apple cider vinegar to fake the acidic taste. The crust was made from basic pantry staples like flour, sugar, and butter or lard. The dish reportedly tasted like a custard made from salt and vinegar chips, a rare dessert that leaves the roof of your mouth tingling. Okay, this one is a bit of a curveball. Cold milk soup? But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Cold milk soup was a Depression-era staple, and it's exactly what it sounds like. This dish has Amish origins and was one of the most popular meals back in the day. It was also pretty simple to whip up. Take some milk, mix in sliced bananas, a bit of sugar, and sometimes even bread or other fruits. And there you have it, cold milk soup. It might not sound like much, but for many families, this was a quick and easy way to get some calories and nutrients, especially when fresh ingredients were hard to come by. The bananas added some natural sweetness, while the milk provided protein and fat. It was a simple, no-cook meal that could be thrown together in minutes and was perfect for those hot summer days when turning on the stove was the last thing you wanted to do. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. Next up, a dish that sounds almost too simple to be true: tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. I know, it doesn't exactly scream gourmet, but remember, we're talking about a time when people were just trying to survive. This combo was a way to stretch those precious few ingredients. During the Great Depression, potatoes were a cheap and filling staple, and tomato sauce was an easy way to add flavor. This dish was essentially a plate of creamy mashed potatoes topped with a savory tomato sauce. It might sound a bit unusual, but this combination was a hit because it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. Plus, Potatoes were versatile. You could mash them, fry them, or bake them depending on what you had. So, if you're ever in the mood for a simple yet tasty meal, try tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. Let's see if this humble dish can impress our modern taste buds. Ravioli sandwiches are an unconventional, playful lunch option that taps into the beloved flavors of Italian cuisine while embracing the convenience of a sandwich. These emerged likely in response to the popularity of canned ravioli introduced by Chef Boyardee in the 1930s. The sandwich involves placing canned ravioli, filled with meat or cheese, between slices of bread, which can be toasted or grilled to meld the flavors and add a textural contrast to the soft ravioli filling. Known in some places as Italian sloppy joes or ravioli hero, these sandwiches gained a following among budget-conscious college students and anyone appreciating the melding of comforting Italian flavors with the easy handheld format of a sandwich. Bacon. Crackers, I mean, sure, they're pretty good even as a typical easygoing breakfast, but what do we really do here? You eat something enough times, you tend to get used to it and get bored. How do you get around that? Well, since the topic is retro dishes, we used to hear a lot about bacon bow tie crackers back in the day. It was something you could find for breakfast or a cocktail appetizer, which is some serious versatility. The crackers were extra crispy since they were wrapped inside bacon and then baked until the bacon itself was pretty crispy. It was the perfect combo, and all they needed was each other to realize that. It was smoky but sweet. It was also savory, but buttery smooth and not dry at all. Dishes that are such neat little combinations like these are often hiding right under your nose, and if we didn't have the imagination of so many home chefs who found these and got them into the public sphere, then we'd be a lot more tasteless as a country. Octopus is actually one I bet you've never really heard about before. Octopus used to be considered a food that was pretty much a last resort. It was something that coastal peasants and fishermen ate when they had literally nothing else. It started to turn into a delicacy thanks to Japanese sushi and Italian seafood dishes, but man, it was really underrated. Octopus was considered super difficult to cook. You had to either dry it or pound it or slow simmer it, and it was really rubbery. The texture was foreign to a lot of people, so that's why they only ate it when there was nothing else. And naturally, if that's all you do, then that's the association you build. It became synonymous with bad times. It wasn't until lots of restaurants started doing things like pulpo alla gallega, which is a popular Spanish dish, and things like takoyaki and reductions that octopus started to gain respect in gourmet circles. The meatball sub is the kind of sandwich that's meant to be messy. The meatball sub has its origins in Italian-American cuisine. While meatballs are a traditional Italian dish, the meatball sub became popular in the U.S. as Italian immigrants put an American twist to it. We're talking juicy meatballs, marinara sauce topped with melted cheese on a long, crusty roll. Yeah, it doesn't really get more American than this. What makes or breaks this sandwich is the sauce, and Grandma knew it all too well. The sauce had to be the right balance of sweetness and acidity, and of course, the bread had to be sturdy enough to hold everything together. It's the kind of sandwich that you need 2 hands to eat, and maybe a napkin or 2, but it's worth every bite. It's a classic comfort food that never goes out of style. Pickled beet and goat cheese sandwiches were like pretty much the same thing as a lot of the recipes from the Depression era that you see persisting beyond the 50s. There's something that people back then acquired a taste for, but this combo really brought out the best of them too. Chèvre, or as we know it, goat cheese, was something that was actually not too popular in America though. It was something that French, Spanish, and Italian immigrants popularized, but it was something that was originally first introduced in America by European settlers. For most of the 17th and 18th centuries, it was a niche thing. Not exactly the main character or a big part of the B-plot, but it was a good extra in the background, sometimes the foreground, know what I mean? Lots of small-scale farming and goat dairy farms did start to open up in places like Wisconsin, Oregon, California, and Vermont, and when the health scares started, the government only started pushing things like goat's cheese more. It wasn't a big stretch to move towards sandwiches then, and the beet and goat cheese combo was already something that worked. In today's day and age, this sandwich just isn't flashy, substantial, or tasty enough to last though. but some people still keep it as a vegan-friendly option. Prune pudding was one of the more niche dishes that were created during the Great Depression. What really was surprising was that prune pudding extended to the upper royalty as well, since even prominent VIPs would also be real low budget with how they eat. Prune pudding became very popular as a result of the efforts made by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who would serve prune pudding at White House functions. It stained the White House's culinary track record, sure, but earned massive points with the struggling American people. For being made of such a simple ingredient and some syrups of your choice, it was definitely one of the tastiest and cheapest meals to come home to. Egg drop soup for some royal courts was a show of a chef's skill. In 1930, America, the soup became a beloved soup of the masses who were struggling to make an honest paycheck. Bread from last night and eggs beaten so thoroughly that the preparation itself doubled as a forearm workout resulted in an incredibly rich soup. Sometimes, if a home cook felt particularly fancy, they would have chicken either boiled or shredded in the mix. Using the chicken stock was also a common way to not let anything go to waste, since getting the most bang for your buck out of poultry became a habit of everyone. Most would just have this with eggs and throw in some ginger, chives and olives, or anchovies. We would definitely like to see this make a comeback with a less cost-oriented version that really explores the dish. Leftover turkey in the fridge? Consider it your lucky day, because that used to call for Grandma's legendary turkey noodle casserole. This casserole made mornings after Thanksgiving something to look forward to. This was the go-to recipe for using up leftover turkey and noodles after Thanksgiving or Christmas. All Grandma had to do was mix in the ingredients and add a topping made from breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even fried onions. Like most of the casseroles on this list, this was also a one-dish wonder and didn't require much labor. And you know, Gram used to be tired from making us a grand feast the night before, so this was an easy way to serve something delicious on the dining table without putting in too much effort. This was a kid-friendly meal that appealed to even the pickiest eaters. What's not to love about a creamy sauce and some noodles all drenched in cheese? Macaroni salad with ham cubes is a really nostalgic one. If you look at it from the lens of what was popular in the era at the time, then yeah, sure, macaroni salads were a perfect middle ground between healthier, leaner bowls of salads and the typical macaroni and cheese meals we were all used to. People thought they had to get started somewhere, and well, why not get it going with something you know you can stand? If you look at it historically, then macaroni salad actually goes all the way back to European dishes like pasta fredda, and in the early 20th century, let's say around the 20s and 30s, it was a really popular meal to have as a side dish. During the Depression, it became a staple because you could make so much of it in large batches and still get everyone fed and taken care of. Now, in the war era, the rise of convenience foods meant that mayonnaise and macaroni were getting even more popular and accessible than ever before. It was only natural that people would start adopting macaroni salads, but they needed something to go with it. Some oomph, you know? That definitely came from the smokiness of the ham cubes, which honestly bounced really well off of the macaroni. This salad was a typical lunch in factories, offices, and just about any kind of labor-intensive job you could imagine. It's just a bit sad that people have gone back to Kraft's mac and cheese boxes now, though. If you are considering giving up Starbucks as a hardship, just try making your coffee out of these plants. Dandelion coffee came into existence during the Dust Bowl when people could not afford coffee beans and other products. That's right, those yellow flowers that appear on your lawn in spring and are so annoying once provided the means to satisfy caffeine cravings at the survival level. For it, people would uproot dandelions, bake the roots until they were black and toasty, and then pulverize them into a brew. There was no sugar or cream, just the natural taste of roasted roots. It was not as strong as real coffee, but it provided people with something warm to drink in the mornings when they were unsure about the future. Moreover, dandelions were free and easily available, no need to go to Starbucks. To the chagrin of dandelion coffee, it is now considered a health drink. Rich in antioxidants, it is believed to have liver benefits and can be found at health food stores for a hefty price. It was not about the latest fad diet or the newest way to live a healthier lifestyle. It was about not going insane without your cup of coffee in the morning. I can't help but wonder how the farmers of Dust Bowl must have been feeling sipping on this dandelion brew and hoping for a better tomorrow and a decent cup of coffee. Now it is a retro chic beverage, while back then, dandelion coffee was a means of getting back to the normal, even if the normal tasted like the grass one mows. If this brought back a taste you forgot you missed, comment your weirdest lunch, like the video, and subscribe for more edible memories.